Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for sticking around and joining us for our post-show conversation. Our panel is a BLUEBARN's Crossroads event, and it is called Shakespeare, Our Contemporary. I'm Barry. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the Director of Engagement here at the BLUEBARN. And we have gathered an amazing trio of directors of this year's regional Shakespeare productions. And I'll let them introduce themselves.
Who am I? I'm Scott Glasser, and I was here on one production, but I've been a season-going person since I moved to town. I'm directing the Tempest for Nebraska Shakespeare this summer. I think that's what we're doing.
Yes.
I teach at UNO.
And I'm Jill Anderson. I directed King Lear, this production tonight. And I'm a local actor and musician and director and arts educator.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Grossman. I use she, her pronouns. I am directing Othello at Nebraska Shakespeare this summer. I'm a director, collaborative playwright, and also do consulting on organizational change management from an equity and justice lens, which I do nationally and internationally.
Genius shot. Well, we've called our conversation here Shakespeare, Our Contemporary, and that is the title of a hugely influential book from the 50s or 60s, I believe, by Jan Kott, which sort of like caused an explosion of interpretation and adaptation and sort of contemporary connectivity with Shakespeare in our society and our culture and how and why it matters now. And so what I've asked each of these folks to reflect upon is, why are we still doing these plays that are 500 years old? Like, why are we doing it? And then more specifically, what right now about, our contemporary cultural moment leads us to produce the specific plays that we've chosen variously this year. So we have a director of Tempest, we have a director of King Lear, we have the director of Othello. Not uncoincidentally, perhaps, some of the most problematic plays in the canon for a variety of reasons, and perhaps we'll be able to get to that a little bit as well. But first questions first, why Shakespeare? Should we be doing it? Why do we come back to it? And Jill, director of the moment, would you like to begin?
Sure. I mean, I guess I would argue that it is the most powerful dramatic literature that exists in the world. I would say that. I've never seen anything or heard anything that cuts to the heart of the human condition with more grace and more incisively than Shakespeare. This particular play, King Lear, is an interesting and gnarly play. So many other of the Shakespeare plays are sort of tidy and, I don't know, easy to put across, but King Lear is this monster of the deep, in a way. It plumbs the depths of, grief, loss, the terror of age, mortality, the most scary things about being human are all in this play. It's all there. And then also just the beauty, the beautiful moments of it, which, I always enjoyed King Lear and liked it, but until directing it, I never was immersed so fully inside of it. And, it's harrowing, and it should be. It should be harrowing to watch, it should be harrowing to act, and it should be harrowing to direct. And I can say positively that as the director, it has been sort of harrowing to direct. So it's absolutely worth it. That was a very circuitous answer, but I just think that this is literature that must never die. It's too beautiful to ever not be produced.
Rachel, why Shakespeare? Why now?
Oh, I don't think Shakespeare needs to be produced ever. Like, I think we're done. He's dead. He's been dead for a very long time, and we've done his plays a lot. And I think that's a very flip way of answering that. I mean, when there's an annual report of like the most produced plays every year in the United States, and they have to sort of skim off Shakespeare, A Christmas Carol, and I'm trying to think what other shows, because they are the most produced plays in the United States. And there is a plethora of stories from people that we could be producing in the U.S., which we are not producing. So I don't disagree with like the things that Jill is saying, and this is like highly ironic. I'm directing, right, a Shakespeare play, and I think what's like, do we need to be producing Shakespeare? Absolutely not. Are people still producing Shakespeare? Yes. And so why, I don't run an institution anymore. When I did, the first show that we did was a Shakespeare play, and we never did it again. And I think it's a comfort. Many of us were raised, it's something, Shakespeare's read in schools as literature. Those of us who are traditional theater goers and are raised as theater goers are raised on a diet of Shakespeare as something that we should know. And so it comes from a very narrow theatrical perspective, as something that is expected for us to come into and understand, and not, and from a very specific way of, especially in the US, of it being produced. And I think, there's a really great, and when I say really great, that's putting it mildly, Shakespeare scholar who explores the intersection of social identity, race, and Shakespeare, named Dr. Ayanna Thompson, who's based in at Arizona State University, who talks about why does she come to Shakespeare? And she says, well, Shakespeare is so wildly produced, it's what everybody is looking at and doing. So the way that she can come into exploring conversations of race and identity with the most mass audience ever is by coming into Shakespeare. She has no necessarily, I don't want to crib her or talk, say her words for her, but the way she can come in and explore really complex conversations that are addressing our society now, for me, talking about, being an anti-racist activist, saying, how do we address racism in our society? It's by saying, okay, well, I'm gonna come in and talk about Othello, which is one of the most anti-Black plays out there. So is to say we're gonna tackle Shakespeare because people wanna see Shakespeare? And so that's why Shakespeare. But if I was running an institution, we should never do Shakespeare. Thanks for producing Shakespeare, BLUEBARN, and thanks for inviting me here. Yay! He knew I was going to say that.
A lot of wonderful points and things to ruminate on. Scott, just building on what Jill and Rachel have said, I've heard it say, in order to understand, if you were of a mind to the Western canon and literature since the 1600s, all you really need to do is read the King James Bible and read Shakespeare. And of course that leaves out, well, the entire rest of the world, I guess, and literatures of, several vibrant cultures and such. But for you specifically, what brings you back? Why Shakespeare? Why now?
How am I going to top Rachel? That's not possible to do that.
I'm really short, Scott, so it's
and I'm really old. I don't share that point of view completely. I share a lot of it about theater, a lot of it about the social issues that have to be conscious social issues in all the theater that we do, that we need to be talking to this audience that's sitting here, not an imaginary audience from 500 years ago. It's very important to all productions. It doesn't matter when the costumes are. What matters is what's happening on the stage and the conversation with the audience. So to me, that's sort of and actually Shakespeare was what brought me into theater, because they didn't do any theater in my 5,000 student high school in New York City, in Brooklyn, no theater. I didn't have any money. I sold shoe shines to go to the theater when I was a teenager, but the free theater in New York was Shakespeare in the Park, in Central Park and in Prospect Park. And I used to go to all those productions. And that was, we're talking 100 years ago. I mean, it's a different time, but every show that I saw was mixed race, every show in those two places. And I thought that's the way it is. It's a microcosm of the whole world out there, and that's what it should be. Well, then of course I left New York, and it's not that everywhere. It was very different. I was naive, but I always see that in the theater. I did Othello, I directed Othello, and at that time, I mean, it was clearly lots of conversations among the cast, so what we're doing it, and how we're doing it, and why. And that never went away, which is great. And luckily, it was actors that I had worked with in all the main characters. That's what I like about controversial plays, is that they're controversial. I love that there's a reaction to it. I love, to say, I never looked at it that way, or why didn't they see that this goes to that? I like that in all the theater, including the contemporary plays that I do. You got me thinking, when I ran a professional theater company for 10 years, Madison Repertory Theater, we did no Shakespeare. We didn't do one in an 8-play season. We didn't do one. And I never thought of that before. They got that elsewhere. There's a big Shakespeare company in a small town not far from there, and they were great. And I did contemporary plays. They had never done any women playwrights. More than half of every season were women playwrights. I mean, so in theater, you make a choice about what you're going to say. You have that responsibility to make a choice. So I left. I left Nebraska Shakespeare in 2009. I didn't like what was going on. I didn't like what was happening politically inside that company by the board. If there's a board member here from that time, I'd love to talk with you. And so the entire artistic staff quit. That was 2009. And I was asked to come back, and I said, if you take care of these things in the company, I'll come back, and they couldn't do that. Well, now all of that's gone, pretty much, and it's starting from scratch again. So I was asked to do it, and I decided, oh, what the hell. And they offered me a show that I had directed there before. I don't think they knew I directed it there. So going to the Tempest, it's why now? Why now, and what does it say? And
I just want to press pause just for a second, Scott, so we can move the question forward for all three panelists. It would be remiss to not point out that there's been huge conversations across the community about Shakespeare's role in our community specifically, and at Nebraska Shakes, as Scott mentioned, which also had a recent shakeup in 2016, and this is a sort of a reboot with you two doing helming these shows, and Jill, I think you're in any one of the shows at Nebraska Shakes. So it's building off of also what Rachel said. If it's not why, then if you are going to approach these plays, how do we approach them with some intentionality and some responsibility? So I'd just love to hear each of you speak to I'm going to say what I think of the problems with these plays, and y'all can address them. If you have a different take in terms of what the actual crux of these patriarchal, Eurocentric, gender, cishet, normative plays are, then please speak to that rather than what I decided are the problems. So we got the Tempest, we got Caliban and Ariel, basically slave figures in this play, which calls to mind all sorts of colonial problems and was written at a time when that whole expansion westward was just beginning. We've got the gender dynamics in King Lear, which are terribly, terribly upsetting and off-putting with the ways that, womanhood itself is demonized or valorized, but in a very sort of Madonna Magdalene sort of binary, right? And then we've got Othello. We've got blackface, we've got a blackface tradition, a black beast narrative, racism obviously throughout. And so when you all come, and I know a couple of you are still in the process of coming to terms with this, and Joe, we have your sort of approach, at least we've experienced it, but don't know maybe exactly how that you came to that question. If y'all would speak to that, I think that would be really, really valuable.
Do you want to start back up with Scott? Because Scott was talking,
Yeah,
is that okay?
That's
Just, directing it the second time, and the last thing I want to do is repeat yourself. I looked at the play anew for me, and I did all the research that I would do if I had never directed it before. And those issues, of course, pop up all the time, especially contemporary analysis of them. They are still slaves in this play, but they deal with it very differently. Caliban is seen as a monster in the play. That's what they refer to him as. His mother was a witch, and all of that. And Ariel plays by the rules and does everything in order to get the prize of freedom. Behaves. We have a man playing Ariel and a woman playing Caliban. So that is unchanged in the play. And that's something I want to bring to the cast. I want them to contribute to it. And I know that we have very strong people in those two roles. Also, Ariel is connected to six spirits who are also at the beck and call of Prospero. They take care of everything that he needs done by a group. They're the storm and so on. But there is this power dynamic which is embedded in the play in lots of different ways. Everyone wants power over the people around them, and nobody gets it. And finally it's given up, mainly by Prospero, although his daughter is the main reason also, who's sort of the person who speaks honestly to him. He realizes that he's more of a monster than Caliban is, because he has all power, so he can make people do whatever he wants. And with the power, he has magic, so he can do things that they can't even conceive of in order to control them. And it's scary. I think there are things in the play that are very frightening. And everyone makes mistakes in the play. And he finally forgives the people he was doing revenge on, and gives the slaves freedom. So where we're left with, as a production, we had to make sure that there's a reason that he's doing it, that he comes to an understanding of who he is, what he's doing, and who they are. And that this is a dark world that he's created around himself, and he has to step away from it and deny it. That'll take a whole rehearsal process, hopefully, and a cast that wants to do that. So that's how it was interesting. The casting it always happens with me. It's all based on their auditions. So the Caliban blew me away in the video audition that she did was just mind-blowing. It was just brilliant, amazing, creative, alive, personal, and I couldn't imagine anyone else playing that role. And that we would interpret it with her, that she'd be part of the interpretation.
So it sounds like you're actually centering these questions as the artistic process with the entire ensemble, based on who's cast for the role.
Yes.
I love that. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, so the gender stuff in King Lear is insane. It's just insane. I mean, it's based on an ancient tale. Ancient tales are, full of archetypes and simplistic ancient Celtic music and British Isles music. I can't tell you the long list of Celtic songs and English songs that talk about the two wicked daughters and the good daughter. And the wicked daughters drown the good daughter in the sea, or they drown the good daughter in the river. And it's that simplistic trope of the two evil daughters. But obviously, that's not purely what Shakespeare did, or it wouldn't be much of a play. I mean, the archetypes are there, but then they're fleshed out to become people with all of these intricate details and facets of character. And then this power struggle and the incredible genderization of everything. It's astonishing that King Lear basically rips her uterus right out of her body through the gods, walks out the door, comes back 47 seconds later and says, "I can't believe you have the power to shake my manhood by sending 50 of my knights away. The tears are bursting from me, the hot tears which break from me perforce." Incredible, you know, that there's just this genderized emotional violence that goes on in the play. And it's very clear that the arguments Goneril makes against him and his 100 rowdy-ass knights are reasonable arguments. She's not being outrageous in having a problem with that. But then there's also, and this is a hard thing to convey to contemporary minds and actors and actresses, is the element of ruthless ambition, which is also a motor and a motivating force within the script. So this is a difficult, gnarly play, as I said, because how much of her arguments are because she doesn't like rowdy, uncouth people in the house, and how much of her arguments are, if I take your military force away from you, I gotcha by the nuts, dude. And I think that there is a marriage of those two things. I mean, there are elements of both of those things. It's a power struggle, and it's so frequently genderized in this play. So that's been, you know, we've been working with those elements. I don't believe that Goneril and Regan are pure evil. And I don't believe that Cordelia is pure good, though she's pretty close to it. She's nobler and higher-minded than most of the other characters in the play, and ennobles her father through her love, despite his frailties and his not understanding his own self. He scarcely knows himself, and yet she knows. I call her the moral plumb line of the play. She always corrects back to the plumb. She's the plumb line. And she, though the youngest, she rights others. She pulls them back in, or attempts to pull them back into balance. She's a balancing element. So that's a very all over the place kind of answer. Mm-hmm. But those are some of the issues that we talked about and dealt with in working with the play.
Rachel.
Like, that was awesome listening to you. I'm trying to remember. So Othello was written, it was first produced just at the turn of the 17th century. So before the concept of race was actually, like, the term race was actually conceived of, and definitely before the term whiteness was conceived of, though people thought of, the Spanish were a race, if the way we think about race, right? Jews were a race, the Italians were a race, otherwise we wouldn't have all these hot-blooded Italians in Romeo and Juliet, right? And when it was written, we know that Othello, like all of Shakespeare's plays, were performed entirely by white, male-identified people of varying ages and sizes and shapes. So we know that the role of Othello was played by a white guy with some stuff on his face. And that's how it was played for a very long time. And there's a line, and this is the paraphrase, in which someone says, "Oh, you know how those Moors are." They're moody motherfuckers, excuse me. That was probably not polite, sorry. But they, how they're like that. Which basically says is this is part of that core anti-blackness that's in the play, which is like, how black people are. They get it in them. And so that's the crux of the anti-blackness, which excuses that Othello can just be manipulated like that. And so as soon as we then put someone in that play that is a black person, that is a black man, we're now embodying that line and all the anti-blackness that's in that play. And as a society, then there's this other thing, which is as a society, we say that's the coveted role for a black person to play, for a black male actor to play. So that's another problematic thing we can deal with. So we have to contend with, like both me and the artistic team, and then now they've put a white cis heterosexual, Jewish non-disabled woman in charge of this play, which is a whole other thing. Like, how do we contend as an acting ensemble, as an artistic ensemble, with this play that pivots around this embedded assumption, which our society also believes about black people? Because we have grown up in this concept of whiteness and in this concept of race, whether or not we want to acknowledge that or not. So we have to address that in our rehearsal, in our production, in everything. And that's so the production of Othello that we're creating is really embracing a lot of the tenets of what's known as like and I'm using this not because I'm trying to be pejorative with it, but just it's known as the sort of decolonizing Shakespeare movement, which is typically in classrooms, but it's embracing it as part of both our production process, but it's also our rehearsal process. But instead of just being in the rehearsal process and then presenting it, it's actually incorporated it into the production process. So the audience is artistically and critically engaged through the production. And we are inviting to actually explore, is this our society now? Like, are we believing this just like they are believing this? So that you hear most of the characters don't refer to Othello as Othello, they refer to him as the Moor, or as the Black Moor, throughout the play. And the thing is, I love that you're like, really? And we don't tend to register. Yeah, it's fucking crazy. Because we don't tend to register that. But we also need to address, and some of this we'll be doing internally, is like, and this is the brilliant thing about him being dead, Shakespeare, not Othello. Spoiler alert, he died. He died. So you know the tragedies. They die. Lear, Othello. Everybody gets married in Tempest because it's a comedy. Is that we have to start addressing like the use of the word, for instance, master, which is a problematic word. So we replace master, right? We replace a lot of the use of the word black, which is in an insulting way that we don't need to be using. And so there's very select use of the word black in the play and how we're using that. So like these are things that we're doing throughout the play.
Very cool.
Nice.
And can I jump into that?
Sure. If you could springboard on top of I'm just going to build on that to let you build on that, and so they'll have something to go afterwards if you don't mind.
Well,
Just speaking of like the freedom we have, not to correct Shakespeare, but engage with it and ensure that we're treating it responsibly. Like you spoke to decolonization of Shakespeare. There's also a sort of movement toward diversification, queerification, ableification, whatever those terms are, to make sure that these plays remain accessible, inclusive, and representative, and not just perpetuating all the harm of the last, millennia, right? And so, specifically, not to process, but in terms of how we're engaging our communities, inviting them in, what are the ways that we can ensure that, if it's going to remain accessible, and it seems like that's going to be the case for another 1,000 years because, we like what we like, how do we make certain that, like, we're not engaging in harm? How do we make certain we're welcoming people with Shakespeare? What can we do, given this freedom, to do really anything with this dead guy's work? What can we do?
Yeah, like, thanks for being dead for so long, Shakespeare.
Amen. So and please, Scott, feel free to talk about whatever you want, even if it doesn't.
It was very short. What you described, you're doing in adjusting the script, consciously making some adjustments so that the audience can still listen and still be there, engaged in it. I know you did in Lear, and I'm doing in Tempest. So that it's a common thing. Hopefully it's done with integrity. I can guarantee with these two, it's done with integrity, and that there's a point of view about how we reach the audience. Does this language force us to go make a left-hand turn from what's really important here, and so on and so forth. Since I worked with Yolanda, I know that in Lear you did the same thing.
Yeah, I guess the little adjustments I made with the text were more to make it friendlier for a modern ear, and it was minimal alteration.
It was.
And it wasn't based on problems or issues of sexism or racism, or it was more understandability stuff.
Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And where would you go?
Yeah,
Where do we go from
specifically,
here?
how do we get the broad, diverse population, members of our community how do we make space for them in Shakespeare? What are the challenges there? What are our opportunities? You mentioned coming from a very, very multicultural environment in New York, and then here we are in Nebraska, and across the board we have problems with fully white cis productions and audiences that seem to create a barrier. If we're not actively inviting folks in to be a part of this Shakespeare experience, well, A, why not? And then B, how? How do we do that? How do we make Shakespeare welcoming and transformative for folks of all sorts of identities?
Well, those are different issues I see there.
Yeah.
None of the theaters in town have the money to put towards inviting people who wouldn't normally come to the theater. You have to be creative, and it takes people and time to do that. And some of the companies are threadbare in that, and people come and go so that everyone's doing it for the first time. The other is casting. Casting all of the plays. It should reflect, it doesn't necessarily have to directly reflect the audience. We're not going to take a poll, but it should reflect the community, the whole community at large. And I think that gets, in a way, gets easier and easier when the things that the audience sees on television, commercials are, mixed race more and more, and you see people of color, and you see people with different ethnic backgrounds. The more that happens, the easier it is for the audience to understand that. But there will be audiences who come and say, this is a mixed race camp, and that doesn't reflect my view of the world. So there's always going to be people who feel outside.
Absolutely, and we could cater to those audiences, or we could create the new ones we want to see, I suppose. But Jill?
Yeah, I feel like arts organizations are scrambling to diversify or whatever, and so often it comes across as tokenism instead of trying to make inroads in a fundamental, foundational way to make connections with people of many diverse backgrounds. And my interest is not only in, diversity, racial diversity, sexual identity diversity, but also ableism, is a problem. And opening the doors for people who, perhaps have physical disability or developmentally disabled people, opening your mind as a director or an organization to how might a person who would not typically be involved in a theatrical production, how might their special abilities be woven into the fabric of a show or a project? That's something that's of interest to me as well. But I think it has to be done on a foundational level, as opposed to, I'm panicking, Black Lives Matter, go out and find the first dark face that I see, and I see arts organizations so often doing this reflexive thing to what the current political, movements are, instead of thinking, how do we completely restructure our way of locating talent and getting involvement going, in a broad way, in a respectful way, instead of a tokenizing way.
I think, like Jill, what Jill is saying, like, really leads to, I think, like, sort of the like my sort of response, which is really, it's about who is making the decisions. It's really who's in power. So, I want to, like, point out, if we're looking, the big reveal is that we're all white.
You're all white.
Thank you. Surprise, wow. Spoiler alert, right? And so I'm really disappointed that, which I think is just, unfortunate that Tyrone Beasley, who's the new artistic director of Nebraska Shakespeare, was not able to join us tonight, just circumstantially. But that's one Black man who is in an artistic position, leadership position here in Omaha. And when we look nationally, when we're looking at who is in charge of arts institutions, arts, culture, and heritage institutions, who are in leadership positions, who are in positions of power, and then who is surrounding people who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, who are queer identified, LGBTQIA2S+, who are non-disabled, who are disabled, when we're looking at that community, and any intersecting social identities of those folks, it's very few. So it's a great honor, and I know my colleagues, I assume my colleagues agree, like, to be in the positions that we're in. But I know, and I can only speak for me personally, like, I told Tyrone, like, I accepted this because my goal, being very new to this community, is about how do I uplift, and it's about using the positional power that I have in order to start saying, like, I've seen who is in the positions of power, who has access, and who doesn't. So I would only accept, and, like, the last show that I directed was Diary of Anne Frank at the Rose, and I was very clear when I accepted that position from Matt Gutcheck. I said, I will only do this if I can cast, and I have a design team that is not the traditional looking, and I can cast anybody I wish and work with anyone I want to, and the theater is very open with that, because it's about building up using the power that I have, so I no longer am able to work, or I'm working under someone else. And I'm fine with that, like, because that's my mission, is, like, my activism and who I am. And I think that we get too much into this, the pie is only a pie, and not, we're at a smorgasbord and anybody can bring anything, right? So, like, I think, that's the coming off of what Jill just said. I think it's about who's in those positions of power, and how are we filling the positions of positional power with momentous moments.
Sounds good.
It sounds right? Thanks, okay. You can have that phrase, use it freely. Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for your honesty, openness, and willingness to really wrestle with these issues, which if you're going to tackle Shakespeare, if you're going to tackle theater, if you're going to tackle, gathering as community, you need to have that sort of willingness, and you all three share that. I'm so deeply appreciative of all of you and all of your work. Do we have any questions from the audience? I do want to make space for maybe one. Ma'am?
As you've been talking, and it was great, your openness is really good, wonderful. How do you get kids involved. You know, I don't see any real young people. How do you get them involved with Shakespeare? I mean, I really am at I don't know how to do that.
Don't worry about it. There's so much other theater they can see other than
Well,
Shakespeare.
that's true. But there is so much.
Yeah.
But how do you do Shakespeare with them? They're like, no.
Well, I have an idea just from my experience doing educational work in high schools all around the state. You know, I've been one of the people in the white van.
Yeah.
You know, several years for Nebraska Shakespeare Festival, a long time ago. But the kids that we worked with absolutely loved. We did scene work with them, and at the end of the week of an intensive, you know, Shakespeare education program, they got to put on a show or scenes from what we've been doing, and they were all about it. They loved it, you know. So I think getting into the high schools with enthusiastic performers and educators, and letting them get their feet wet with it and learn how it feels to act it. It doesn't work as literature to fire people up at that age. I just don't think it does. You know, or to take in, would take in a little, maybe 45-minute show of professional actors doing scenes, various scenes from Shakespeare, and it was fun, and it was good, and it was understandable. So to present it as performance and to let them get a crack at being the performers after they've been fired up about what they saw, then is enlivening to them. And they don't think of it as something way on a page at all, or way off in some esoteric world. It's like, you know, you get to fight Romeo now. Go, get it, go after it. That's exciting, you know. So I just think making it fun and challenging for them at that age is crucial. Just don't hand them a book, please. Don't give them a book.
I just want to share a story. You made me think of this. My first exposure to Shakespeare was when I was a freshman in college. And I went to a small girls' school down in Kansas. And I knew nothing about Shakespeare. We hadn't read any Shakespeare in high school. And they said that they were presenting Othello these certain nights, and it was a requirement. We all had to be there. And you know, I thought Othello, the actor, was black. I never questioned that. So I think perhaps he was. It was 1950. So, no, about 53, if he's 53 or 54. And I don't know, but I sure remember Othello. Like nothing else in Shakespeare, I remember Othello. We read about it beforehand, and then we went to it, and I was just mesmerized. And I don't know if the theater department took on more of that, you know. None of those actors were from our college. They were all some professional group or semi-professional group that came in. But, you know, and I'm 86 now, I remember all of that so well, and I would have sworn to you, this was a reveal to me that there was that assumption that it would be a white person with black face. That's just really surprised me tonight.
I'm not far behind you, and it's been true in my lifetime, a blackface. Absolutely, I saw it on television, I saw it in filmed theater from Great Britain,
Yes, oh my yes.
and so on.
Oh yes, Al Jolson was kind of the very, very well-known one.
And Laurence Olivier in 1964, and it's still being shown. So, brilliant actor, but that's not his role.
We all think he
Yeah,
was.
just want to add
Yeah.
that it makes, if you have an experience like that, for any kind of theater, any kind of performance, and it really grabs you in a way that nothing else has, it really makes a difference for your life. And
Oh, yeah.
I saw no Shakespeare until 6th grade. It was a professional touring group doing an hour version of Twelfth Night in our little, it wasn't really an auditorium, there was a room. And I still remember that. Still remember that. And
Yeah.
I thought I understood everything at the time.
Of course you did.
Well, listen, I want to close by letting y'all know about some upcoming Shakespeare experiences in the region. If Jill's miraculous production of King Lear managed to whet your appetite, we have these things on tap. Coming up in May, Juno Swan is producing Storm Still by Gab Reisman, a play for Lear's daughters, and that'll happen at the Bancroft Street Market. Real close to here. I don't have my, it's some this way.
Yeah.
Shakespeare on the Green, of course, with both Scott's and Rachel's production of Othello and the Tempest will happen June 23rd to July 17th.
There's a special actress who is in it.
A special actress playing Antonia in
Or O.
the Tempest.
Antonia.
Or O.
Don't just sue.
I won't assume. I can't wait to see it though. It's one of my favorite
In what?
roles and I
In
can't wait to
Tempest.
see you in that role.
Tempest.
Oh, the Tempest. Oh my gosh.
It's going to be amazing. And then also, just a little bit away, Flatwater Shakespeare. One of our cast members is actually Director of Education at Flatwater Shakespeare in Lincoln. They have a couple of shows coming up, Much Ado and Julius Caesar, and that'll be in June and August in Lincoln. So please be sure to try to check those out, and round of applause for you all.